isn't it?
Great. Thanks, Ross. And thanks everybody for joining us today for this, I guess, the next edition of Resulting's Modern ERP series of webinars. The focus of today, as Ross has already outlined, is collaborative business process management. And if I can just move the slide forward, I'll just make sure that everybody's in the right place. So here's the topic, and this is largely around, I guess, the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing now as many organizations embark upon digital transformation. A lot of that's being driven, particularly in the SAP space, by potential moves to S/4HANA, for example. So our focus today is really, how do you make sure that you understand the process scope of your organization, and what opportunities are there to do something a little bit different and more collaborative around the way that processes within the organization are managed. And as part of that, we're going to consider when's the right time to consider process mapping, and not process mapping everything to into a huge amount of detail. So we're going to be joined by Kieran Coughlin from Nintex, who's going to be talking to us and doing a demo actually of the ProMap application, which we think brings a really innovative approach to the way that processes within an organization can be managed. So there's lots to get through. So I'll whiz through these early slides as quickly as possible. And as Ross has said, if you do have questions, please feel free to post those, and we'll cover those off at the end of the session. So as I mentioned, we've been doing a series of these webinars. The one today is focused on process management. And this is part of thinking about approaches to ERP and business transformation a little bit differently. So this is what we'll cover. I'll just do some very quick intros on the next slide. Then we're going to focus in on some research that we did last year, just to provide some context around the challenges related to business strategy and business process within a number of organizations as they embark upon business transformation. We'll talk you through our approach to building a process framework, how that can be used to identify your competitive advantage and why that's important. And then ultimately we'll move on to process mapping. So using our process framework approach to really understand what to process map and why you should do that. And that will be at the handover point to Kieran, who'll then take us through the ProMap application and talk a little bit more about collaborative process management, and then time at the end for Q&A. So I'm Nick Coburn, I'm the Consulting Director at Resulting. I'll be joined next up by Alex Stewart, who's one of our solution architects. And as I've mentioned, we'll then hand over to Kieran from Nintex, who'll take us through the ProMap demo. So firstly, a little bit about our research. At Resulting, research is really at the forefront of everything that we do from a consulting perspective. It's a great way to understand what's actually going on in the marketplace. And as many of you will be aware, we've done a number of pieces of research recently over the last 2 to 3 years in relation to S/4HANA. Clearly in the SAP world, that's a huge topic. So when are people migrating to S4? How are they going to do that? What the options might be? How does that enable business transformation? How does it align to overall business strategy? So you'll see some flavors around SAP today, but ultimately, when we talk about business processes and collaborative process management and process frameworks, it's as true with any ERP application. It's not just SAP. But this time last year, we actually ran some research around centers of excellence, and largely centers of excellence that were running SAP, or the organizations they supported were running SAP. And we had some really, I guess, standout statistics from our research. So the first one was around aligning with strategy. So does your center of excellence have a clear alignment with your business strategy? If you group these columns together, ultimately, the survey was telling us that 46% of the respondents said that there wasn't really a clear alignment with business strategy. So if you think about an SAP Center of Excellence, that's typically at the forefront of supporting an SAP solution, driving business process improvement, driving improvements in technology. And in many cases now, it's the Centre of Excellence that's preparing for that migration to S4. So it was quite a stark statistic if 46% of the organizations we surveyed, and we had about 130 responses, 46% of those said, we don't have a clear business strategy or we're not aligned with that. So clearly there's room for improvement there. So we dug a little bit deeper. And if I just move this slide on a little, the interesting statistic here was around centers of excellence and alignment with business processes. So does your COE have a definitive list of business process? Ultimately, does the COE, is the COE clear on the scope of the business processes that the organization is running? And interestingly, 72% of the respondents that we surveyed said that they were either unclear, they didn't have a list at all, or that they maybe had a list in the past and it was out of date. And I think for many of you who've been through complex ERP transformation programs, you've potentially had a business process master list that's used to run the program, but are you keeping that up to date? And is that really being used as the basis for all of your enhancements and future project work? And is that process framework up to date so you can actually use it as the basis for a business transformation and ultimately you'll move to S4? So this was a really interesting statistic. The other call out from here was of the 22% who didn't have a definitive list of business processes, 61% of those didn't actually have an SAP Centre of Excellence in place. That's another topic, but all of this information, the research is available on the Resulting website. So there's clearly an issue here that we need to address. If we look at the move and I guess the progression towards S4, look at this graphic down towards the bottom, 16% already in that process, implementing S4, 18% planning to move in the next 1 to 2 years, and 34% within 3 to 5 years. So a significant cohort here who are about to embark upon are already in a significant business transformation enabled by their move to S4HANA. That's really difficult to do unless you have absolute clarity on the scope of the business processes that your organization is running. Because what we'd expect as we prepare for the transformation is understanding that the impact that the move to S4 would have on those business processes. We'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation around how we classify and categorize processes and how we determine competitive advantage. So I'm going to hand over next to Alex Stewart. As I mentioned, Alex is one of our solution architects, and Alex is going to talk through Resulting's approach to building a business process framework. Alex, over to you. I'll just stop sharing and hand over.
Thanks, Nick. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so I mean, Nick's talked a little bit about process frameworks, but I guess the first thing to really discuss is what is a process framework. So in its simplest form, it's a master list of all of the key processes that are performed by an organisation, and they're grouped hierarchically and organised to show how they relate to each other. So it basically aims to provide a standard work framework, a common language that aims to drive consistency and standardization across the business. So it's not a visual representation of the flow of work. It's not a process map. It's not a flow chart or a swim lane diagram. It basically provides the organization with a single centralized global repository of business processes. So at Resulting, we've basically we built our own framework, which is based on APQC's standard cross-industry process classification framework, which basically provides a common and consistent view of process structures for similar organizations. So APQC are the American Productivity and Quality Center, and they are the world's foremost authority on benchmarking best practice processes, performance improvement, and knowledge management. And their process framework's been used as the basis by hundreds of leading companies worldwide. So basically, using this APQC framework as a baseline, we've then added some resulting specific additions and amendments to create a resulting variation that is built on kind of our experience, and also from working with customers from different industries and building that up. We then take the client-specific requirements and business nuances. So this framework can be then further enhanced and adapted to specifically fit the organisations that we're working with, to enable us to develop a client-specific process classification framework. And we're finding that this actually forms the backbone of a lot of the work that we're doing. So as Nick said, particularly when we are supporting our clients on transformation projects, etc. So we've now got a list of all our key processes. They're grouped hierarchically, and we can see how they relate to each other. What happens then? So we then, sorry, wrong button. So we've now got our common consistent view of the world, and we can then assess the current status of each process across the business. And we do that by categorising processes in various different ways using different types of metadata. And we call this our business process optimization catalogue, or BPOC. So augmenting by various different types of metadata, such as whether a process is a commodity process, whether it's complex, whether it provides top or bottom line competitive advantage, is it customised, basically enables us to build up and establish a comprehensive view of our business processes. And we can then slice the business processes in different ways to truly understand the drivers and where we should be focusing our resources and our efforts. Okay, so using the BPOC, we can then assess the current state of our processes and gather more information, and use that to basically determine where we want our process improvement or process mapping priorities to be focused. So the BPOC's got a number of use cases that it can help to accelerate. So it provides a standard framework for process improvement. It provides us with a standard framework to define project scope and system requirements. It also gives us a framework for process ownership and governance, and also can help us to build our business strategy, and also to develop our roadmap from a technology perspective in terms of our transformation project. And then we've also used it to support organisational change, so identifying the potential areas that could prove problematic as you go on your transformation project. So basically, assessing the current state of our processes helps us to provide a baseline for process understanding, improvement, performance management, and engaging with our business users to actually think in terms of process rather than technology. So the framework, it basically consists of 5 levels of process decomposition, each providing a more detailed and granular view of the elements that are combined together as part of the process. So the framework basically begins at level 1, which is our process category, and that represents the highest level of the process definition across the business. So in this example, finance. So within our framework, we've aligned our process category to represent the business function with overall responsibility for the process, so finance, procurement, commercial, supply chain, etc. We've had various discussions, and there are various arguments for the process categories to be structured as per the end-to-end process, so purchase to pay, order to cash, etc., rather than functionally. But we think that first view, being functionally driven, provides a clear view of where the business processes sit in terms of functional responsibility. In order to achieve the end-to-end view, we do actually use that as one of the augmentation categories. So we can actually get that end-to-end business process view using the BPOC approach. So we then can swap between the functional and end-to-end view of the world. So level 2 represents our process group. So that's the process group, which is the logical grouping of the individual processes. So in this case, performance, planning and management accounting. And then level 3 is the individual process. So that's the series of steps that are required to achieve a particular result or outcome. So perform cost accounting, perform general accounting, etc. And then we break it down into the individual activities that make up the process. So the individual steps and events that need to be performed when we're executing that process. So again, in this example, perform inventory management, process journal entries, produce regulatory reports, etc. And then when we get down to level 5, we're going into the individual tasks and elements of work that are required to kind of execute the activities at level 4. So we generally start the process of building our process framework and BPOC by taking the processes at a level 3 and building up a visual representation of the organisational scope at that level, trying to clearly identify what's in and out of scope from a functional point of view. So you'll see here we've got a process category of finance, and that's split into 9 level 2 processes, and then a number of lower level 3 processes. The categorization that we've used here is freely definable. In this particular example, we are looking to implement a core finance solution, but then also want to capture any integration points that we need to consider. So with external systems, so that might be to ensure that we're capturing the right level of data within that core solution to feed the external systems. So for example, all of the kind of darker colours are a part of the core finance scope. The blue is an integration point with an external system, and then the grey are not in scope for this particular transformation project. And we've generally found that this visual can be pretty powerful, and often find that it's the kind of first time that stakeholders clearly can see the scope of their organisation's processes and sometimes what they have responsibility for in quite a clear, concise way. So once we've got the level 3, we then kind of build that out to level 4, and again go through a similar process but at the kind of activity level. Again, in this example, we're identifying what's part of the core finance, what's an integration point, and what's not in scope or consideration for the project at all. And again, building up these views, so giving the stakeholders a really clear view of what the scope of the project is. So we mentioned our BPOC and the augmentations that we've used, and this is an example of some of the ones that we've used and found that are really kind of explicit. So we can have a look at top and bottom line competitive advantage, whether a process is a commodity process or not, the degree of bespoke functionality and customization, process integration points, as I mentioned earlier, the end-to-end process alignment, complexity of a process, its efficiency, whether it's critical to the business, any kind of risk and compliance or key control measures that are applicable, and kind of the current target applications, and also what the change impact is. And that basically allows us to build up different views of the business processes based on those augmentations. Nick, shall I pass over to you?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that again. So now we're just going to look at competitive advantage. So Alex has talked through, we're now in a situation where we do have a clear view of business process scope within the organization. And we've been able to categorize and classify our business processes in a number of different ways. And you saw at the top of that list that we had a piece on top or bottom line competitive advantage. So we just wanted to highlight this one because this is becoming increasingly important. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about moving to S4, but it's just as applicable with any ERP-enabled business transformation, because ultimately what you're often doing is looking at opportunities to standardize business processes, and that could be standardization across the organization, different countries, different plants, different offices globally, different ways of working. It could just be an opportunity to look at what you get out of the box standard within SAP, and maybe you've had quite complex customized processes before, and now you want to see if you can fit to standard. So really understanding your business process scope and then understanding where you have top and bottom line competitive advantage is really important. What we typically do is start to look at the shape of an organization and its processes. If I take a classic example across this axis here, so here we're looking at blue line competitive advantage. So this is top line, this is revenue generating, how you actually engage with your customers, for example. And bottom line is more focused on cost savings, cost reduction, those types of areas. Across this red axis here at the top, we've got vendor innovation, what's available in SAP, what's available in the new version of S4, and what have you bespoke or customized over recent years. So we talked about an SAP Center of Excellence at the beginning. Maybe there've been a whole series of enhancements over the years, and you've now got processes which are heavily bespoke and heavily customized, which may be more difficult to move to standard processes in S4, for example. So if you take an absolute classic here, which is journal posting, that's absolutely standard. It's absolutely core. It's a commodity transaction in the finance world. There's no reason that we really should have ended up with a bespoke process. However, something which is around marketing and outreach to your customers, so campaign execution, it really supports top line revenue generation. And therefore, it may well be that you've been looking at, you have a specific process which is very tailored to the needs of your business. And that may be something that you want to protect, and you're not going to get that out of the box in the standard SAP solution, for example. So if I just draw a ring around those areas and look at the shape, we have this, I guess, a clustering towards the center, but it's not necessarily in all of the right areas. If I just expand upon that a little bit, what we'd really be expecting to see as we're preparing for a move to S4 is categorizing journal postings, for example, as being absolutely standard, commoditized process. We're going to accept what we get out of the box with SAP. Similarly with expense claims and large swathes of managing procurement. So the way that we deal with purchase requisitions, purchase orders, a lot of that is pretty standard. Now, if I look at my campaign execution, I might want to explore what is available in certain CRM solutions, for example. If I look at route planning and supply chain, again, what's new and different, for example, in S4, and is that going to support some advantage for me? So it's just looking at those processes with a slightly different frame as we begin to prepare our roadmap as part of our ERP business transformation. And that could be a mixture of value next, so the roadmap for the future, moving to S4 and the migration that goes with that, understanding what's new in S4, how that aligns with your business strategy and strategic thrusts. Or it could be what we call value now. So per our COE survey earlier, some organizations aren't thinking about moving to S4 right now. Some are only going to do it in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's quite a long time away. So what do you do with the current solution and the current business processes? Well, you can look at opportunities for improvement around those business processes, maybe opportunities to simplify and standardize as you actually begin the process of looking at what's available in S4 and looking at how ultimately you're going to migrate. So although the timeframe could be quite some distance in the future, there is work that you can do right now, but you can only really do that successfully if you don't understand the scope of the business processes that your organization is running, and you can classify and categorize those in different ways. So just the final part before I hand over to Kieran. And Kieran's going to talk us through and give us a demo of the ProMap solution, and actually talk about the way that processes are mapped in ProMap. But actually, you'll see that ProMap itself is a lot more than that. It's actually a collaborative way to managing business processes. And often when we engage with customers, we hear that there's a huge exercise underway to map all of the as-is processes before we then process map the to-be processes. But do you really need to do that? Should you really be mapping absolutely everything? So more and more frequently now, I guess, we're using the process framework approach and the classification and categorization to really understand what we should process map and why that really matters. That means that process mapping can be a lot more targeted. We can save a huge amount of time as part of the transformation program. And we can get the functional teams, the process teams, change management teams really focused on the areas that are going to add significantly more value than locking people away in workshops for weeks on end, mapping processes that you're actually about to throw out of the window and move to a new set when you move to S4. So when Alex talked you through the process framework, she explained that we come at the process framework from I guess, a process domain perspective, finance, procurement, commercial, supply chain. And Alex mentioned that it's very easy for us to map the process domain into an end-to-end process. So we just worked through a classic procurement example here, and the difference between source to pay and procure to pay. So source to pay and procure to pay spans both procurement and finance, as everybody knows. If we look at the component parts, I'll just switch all of these on. So here's our source to pay process, which runs all the way through from category management and vendor selection into the way that we manage vendors and ultimately the way that we manage contracts. Procure to pay is that narrower slice within the middle. So really looking at the point that we're raising a requisition to the point that we actually go through to payment processing. So now I actually have a view of my end-to-end process. And on this next slide, I'm showing how that end-to-end process can be quite simply mapped into our process framework. So running across the top are the components of a classic P2P process, but in process framework, that relates to two major components. So this reference here, PRC 37, will tie back to a standard APQC reference, or if we're using the resulting framework, a standard reference that we have. So perform operational procurement, and over on the finance side, process accounts payable and expense reimbursements. So a very simple way to describe the full extent of the end-to-end P2P process. Then within that, we're ordering materials and services, we're processing accounts payable. And as Alex explained before, we can then break that down into a more granular view of our level 4 process steps. So creating the requisition, approving the requisition, creating quotes, having purchase orders reviewed and approved. So very standard classic P2P example, which shows the mapping through to the process framework. So now I have a really clear idea of my process scope in procurement. So what I've done earlier is I've used that BPOC, the optimization catalog approach, to conduct a review of process complexity. And the outcome of that shows me that actually I have some procurement processes which are really, really standard and pretty straightforward, all of those which are in green. But actually, in terms of our current system and our current processes, I've got a number of orange areas which I might want to go and have a look at because they appear to be quite complex. And I've got some red areas which appear to be highly complex. Who knows the reason for this complexity that's built up over a number of years? It could be lots of different ways of working across the organization, high degree of customization, as we explained previously. But I know that I've got some complex areas within my procurement process. And we've also done the analysis now through the classification and categorization process to highlight where we have process issues currently. So these gray areas, absolutely fine. We're not too concerned about these. But actually, I know that I've got some issues with paying vendors. And I think for many organizations that's often been a challenge in the past. Payable exceptions and processing payments. So now I'm starting to build a view of, I've got some complex processes and I know that I've got process issues. This process is not as efficient as it could be. So when it comes to process mapping, now I actually have a view of the candidates, the areas that I want to go and revisit in a little bit more detail. So rather than mapping the whole of the end-to-end procure to pay process, I'm going to do some really targeted process mapping on, for example, the supply payment run and the way in which we process payments. And when I've done that, I'm going to go and tackle the medium complexity candidates, which are the ones that you see here in orange. But the one thing I'm not going to do is process map the entire as-is process for procure to pay. So this is a much more targeted approach. And that's the perfect segue to hand over to Kieran. And Kieran's going to give us an introduction to Nintex and give us a demonstration of ProMap. Over to you, Kieran.
Thanks very much, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, excellent stuff. And you can just let me know when you can see my screen. That'd be great.
Yep, got it.
Wonderful stuff. Okay, thanks very much, Nick, for the introduction. Really, really appreciate it. So my name is Kieran, and I'm a senior product specialist here at Nintex, specializing in the ProMap application. And Nick's given a very good background for what ProMap is and how it could potentially slot in and add value to the ERP design and sort of operational excellence processes. So the ProMap is essentially an online platform where you store your business processes. It's a single source of truth, and it's where people go for best practice and understanding on how to do their jobs, but also where organizations go to build their improvement frameworks and their automation frameworks and start building out systems and ERP systems as well. So just to give you an idea of some of the organizations out there in the world using ProMap in relation to ERP, I managed to pull a couple of names and logos from our customer management system there to get some of these big names. And I've worked with a number of these as well. And while all of them had ERP and developing of sort of classic ERP processes in their objectives, they all ended up finding much more value out of ProMap in many different ways. And I'll come back to one of these examples right in the middle here, Universal, in a minute or two, and talk you through what they did with the ProMap and some of the benefits they found as a result of using it. So first of all, why is ProMap so successful, and why have organizations like the one you see here have decided to use it over something like Visio or documenting processes in Excel and spreadsheets and other traditional ways of doing it? And the main reason is the way in which we consume information has very much changed. We live very busy lives with high expectations on the work around us, and we expect information and guidance we need to be readily available and easily acceptable. So the bar has been kind of dramatically raised in terms of what information is and what it looks like and how we're supposed to interact with it. And what I'm referring to here is the dozens of applications and websites that you will visit on a daily basis where you go for your information. And these applications know who you are, they know what you like and what you dislike, and they can serve you information based on that concept daily, hourly, on a silver platter for you to absorb and go on to the next one. That's how we consume information today. The part of our brain, the muscle in our brain that can flick through a 50-page procedure manual or look at a very complex Visio diagram has, for lack of a better term, atrophied. We don't really have that anymore. But we see organizations putting this style of information in front of their employees and expecting them to find it useful, to rely on it, to build systems on it, to deliver consistent and high quality products and services to their customers, but it's so ridiculously low people's expectations. These type of processes are usually built by technical specialists, and technical specialists absolutely have their role when it comes to system design and implementation. But when we're talking about supporting best practice, this kind of stuff is universally ignored by business teams. And that's why ProMap is really focused on helping business teams get down what it is they do and providing a platform to work on it and make it better as well. And more often than not, we see organizations who use this style of mapping that you see on screen here is that it's out of date, and it is definitely an administrative nightmare to manage them at all. So if we rely on information that people don't want to use, first of all, we get no real clear way of working. Things go wrong, there's rework involved, poor customer experience, stifled improvement and implementation and automation efforts, no ability to scale, and a real lack of agility and non-compliance, because this stuff is just a monster to try and deal with in general. And if we kind of rely on this to build out our ways of work and to improve our ways of work, we tend to lose most of the business along the way. There's no engagement with the right way to do things. And there's an attitude that process becomes something done by specialists and it's not part of your job. Yes, specialists are involved in process improvement and building out of systems as well, but we always need to consider the people who are actually doing the processes every day. And that's where ProMap comes in. So ProMap is on a mission to rid the world of overly complex process maps and procedure manuals that people won't understand and won't read at all. And if you want to release process excellence into your organization, first of all, you need processes that are actually genuinely engaging, helpful, and useful so that teams have absolute clarity over how things are done. So really what we're trying to do here is make processes a part of the business assets. The way you view your buildings and your equipment and the technology you use, there's another asset that fits right in there as well, and that's your processes. And the reason it hasn't been in there traditionally is because processes are generally something quite complex. ProMap is there to simplify all of this. What we want is everybody engaging in innovation. So critical to building a process culture of excellence is that teams find value in this kind of stuff. So providing them with mechanisms to give feedback, suggest ideas, raise issues, really turn processes into living sort of dynamic documents as opposed to sort of the static kind of PDF stuff that you may be used to as well. And really what it's about for us at the end of the day is the people. So creating process owners who are responsible for creating and updating and sharing processes so that we can build a team, an organization responsible very much for owning the maintenance and the improvement of their processes as well. So that's really, really important to us at ProMap. So going back to one of those examples that I talked about is we have Universal Music. And Universal Music were at a stage where they were kind of building out an SAP platform and they were trying to standardize their finance processes in the short term. And in the long term, they were looking to build a sort of a centralized service center for the entire organization to handle those finance processes. So they were kind of going from something very much ad hoc to standardizing to then centralizing. And they achieved this using ProMap. But I'd like to leave you with a quick quote before we jump into the demo from Rob Larson, who's the head of finance at Universal Music. So Rob said, while the core objective was to drive improved process compliance and quality execution, the engaging nature of ProMap and ease of collaboration has resulted in an improved work culture. Our team members feel more equipped to perform their tasks to standards we all expect. They feel they have a real-time mechanism for providing feedback and recognize that their feedback isn't just lost in the ether, but acknowledged in a transparent and easy two-way communication channel as well. And I can safely say that that is the same for pretty much every organization who uses ProMap, particularly with an initially narrow focus, for example, building out an SAP system and standardizing processes. You can't but help the organic growth and the extra benefit that you would get from simplifying and surfacing all of your business processes as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump away from the presentation and actually look at the tool. So it's just going 10 past now. That should give us enough time. So this is ProMap. Nick, can I just confirm that you can see my ProMap screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is my three or four sort of screen sharing meetings into the day, and I've had some issues earlier on, so better make sure at this stage. So this is ProMap. This is a cloud application where you will store all of your best practice processes and procedures in your organization and to do with them what you want, whether you want to automate your processes, reduce waste, identify areas of non-compliance, increase your training, or use it as a library to build out your automated processes using a system of your choice, such as SAP. This is the central source of truth for all of the information. And it doesn't look like a library or a list from SharePoint. It doesn't look like a static bunch of PDFs. It is built to take pages and pages out of the books of LinkedIn and Facebook and all of these modern applications that we use. ProMap knows who you are. It knows your roles, it knows your responsibilities, and it knows you how to notify you about change related to those things as well. So if you're involved in the procure to pay process that the guys were talking about earlier, and someone decides to put a few extra steps in there, ProMap's going to shoot you a notification via the dashboard here or the email to say, look, you need to go in and acknowledge that you understand that change as well. But first off, the way most people interact with big systems of record is they actually try and search for things, which is fair. So I have a search bar here, and I can type out a word like approve. And it's going to give me a preview with any process that contains it in its title. So I've got review and approve tasks here. But if I hit the enter button, it's going to do a very quick search of every single mention for that word approve across process titles. So we can see review and approve tasks here is actually a step in our finance group in our record to report end-to-end process. We've got an approve advertisement Office template here as well. We've got approved sitting in, one of our processes for devanning import containers, all the way down to product life management, advertising position for HR, approving leave. So in this environment, we can see that we have processes mapped in every single department in the organization. And that's what ProMap's built to be, an application that supports your entire business to surface and understand their own business processes. And it just so happens that it's got a very fast and powerful search feature. So I'm going to jump back to the homepage in the top left corner. Over here sits your profile overview. This is where ProMap kind of steps out of the world of being a strict process documentation tool and comes into the world of operational excellence, continuous improvement, and change management. Most process mapping initiatives involve a lot of resources up front to document the processes, but a lot of thought is never given to, well, how do we keep these things up to date? How do we keep the right people involved? How do we build that change management into our organization? And ProMap does it for you. So I can see here that I have a terrible profile picture. I'm a CEO, lucky me, and I'm involved in 61 processes, and I'm the owner of 68 processes. And if you imagine someone starting day one in the organization and they get given a laptop and they get given access to ProMap and they say, look, we're gonna start your onboarding in a couple of days, but please have a look here at the processes you're in, click that button. And this is a list of anything you could be doing on a given day. These can be customer facing processes, internal support processes, processes that interact with HR. You can see the process name here, the department it sits under, who is responsible from a governance perspective. And then if you've got a couple of roles in the business, you can filter by that also. So for example, in this case, finance manager. We have a couple of record to report and finance processes sitting here for us to complete as well. So very quickly, within 2 clicks, we can get a targeted list of policies, processes, and procedures relevant to me at this stage as well. So I'll jump back to the homepage here. And we can see down here is a dashboard overview. So this is the engine for ProMap. This is the same kind of thing that updates you about posts on Facebook and tags you in things in LinkedIn as well. ProMap has a very similar engine sitting inside of it as well that tells you about process changes, document changes, processes that are up for review, collaboration efforts that someone's trying to reach out to you to provide feedback, or you've left feedback somewhere else and someone wants to answer that as well. So we have loads of great stuff here that this is purely targeted to you, depending on who you are in the business. And then down here, you got the quick links, stuff you've viewed recently and stuff you've added to your favorites as well. That's the dashboard. Nice, simple, easy, engaging way of accessing ProMap and understanding what's going on. But enough talk about, the extra bits. Let's actually go look at a process. And now we're going to tie everything that we saw in the previous slide section from Nick and Alex around APQC frameworks and layering process and structuring information. And I'm going to present it to you in a way that hopefully makes sense to everyone and can be easily interpreted. So to go view my, big old list of processes that sits in my business, I'm going to hit processes, all processes. And this is going to take me to all of the major categories or the level ones that Nick talked about. Now, in this case, I've actually got, some pretty standard departmental views, not necessarily an APQC. So sales and marketing, finance, vendor management, IT, products and services, HR, health and safety, so on and so forth. This is a demo site, so I use it to house multiple potential organizational structures. But in this case, we're going to be focusing on the APQC framework that we alluded to earlier. So I'll click that. And now we're going to go to our APQC framework where we can see our operating processes sitting up here. So our core value driving processes. And down here, we got our support processes as well. And in this case, we are going to jump into manage financial resources. And within manage financial resources, we have those subgroups that we saw Nick and Alex talking about earlier as well. They're just represented directly in ProMap. And now we'll jump into process accounts payable and expense reimbursements. And now we're looking at the end-to-end process for processing accounts payable. So we've got a couple of the high-level processes that we were talking about earlier here. Prepare supplier payment run, resolve payment exceptions, process payments, and then the payment process for the accounts payable and receivable as well. So we can see on the left who's responsible at a high level. But now let's jump out of this overview and actually go look at the process and the procedure and the task level detail we were talking about earlier. So I'm just going to click this. And now we're looking at our actual first process in ProMap. So you'll see a couple of cool things on the screen already. You'll see that we've got some time frames here, a cogwheel up here. We've got our roles and responsibilities here, linked processes. We've got some high level descriptions. Down the bottom, we have a lot of cool stuff too around who's the expert, who's the owner, objectives, review dates, history of changes, documents being used in the process, costing, systems, improvement opportunities, loads of cool stuff there from a business analyst perspective. But going back to what I said earlier, processes need to be owned and understood and usable by the business. So why ProMap is so successful is that it really layers your information in a way that makes sense. So right now we can see our high level activities that we need to complete. If, for example, I need guidance on how we identify the exceptions within our organization, I can just click this process step here, and it's going to take me to the procedure of everything I need to do to complete this first activity. So we've got a series of tasks We've got supporting screenshots about actions we need to click and buttons we need to work on in the system. And we can scroll down and we can see we've got web links to different parts of our SAP for HANA application, for example, here. So we use this structure of, what we do with descriptions and how we do it, links to supporting information. And then we use notes to nest sort of process specific, sort of the 10% as opposed to the 90% information. So for each exception item, check the terms of the exception. So what term should I be looking at? If I need that question answered, I can just expand it and I can get information around what I need to do in that particular case as well. We layer our information in ProMap to make sure that this process map is valuable to many different stakeholders. So not everyone needs to understand what the terms should be, but some people do. So we give them the ability to open up that layer and explore and expand it as well. And the same format goes for the rest of our different activity steps here. So for example, we're contacting the supplier to request payment. And within there, we just give some basic information on what we do. But then we also have an email template that we can download here quickly to standardize our approach to doing this also. This is the map view. If I want to take a procedure view of everything that's happening, I can just select procedure. And it's going to show me the exact same information we just looked at. It's just written in more of a procedure as well. So very, very helpful way of understanding your process in both capacities, the map and the procedure. So I talked a lot about sort of, what processes look like traditionally, and a lot of that kind of exists in PDFs. Absolutely, you can print your process, create a PDF. That's fine in ProMap. You can do that if you want. But what we recommend and what's very valuable for interacting with systems and embedding information is using live links for processes. So up here, for example, I can take this live link, I can copy it, and I can share it. I can put it behind a button in SAP that says process help. I can embed it in a SharePoint page. I can send it to one of our partners, one of our consultants, or even one of the suppliers that we're working with in this case and say, listen, this is the process we're following. We want you involved in the development and the improvement of this process because, a lot of the steps are sitting with you. So we can send this to anybody. And what they can do in this case is give us some feedback. And they can click this feedback button and they can select to give us feedback on a specific item, or they can say, well, no particular activity or task. And then they can say, CEO needs to sign all formal letters of notice, something along those lines. Not a real step, but that's the kind of feedback you might get. In that case, they can determine a response, yes or no, and they could submit that. And now that's going to trigger an email to the owner and the expert to say that someone has left feedback on your activity. So if we jump back into the system, we're now going to put on the hat of the process expert in this case, which is me, which is going to allow me to change this process. And this is where ProMap really comes into its own as a process excellence tool, is everything that I'm going to do here to change this process can be done by anybody in the business. It's very, very easy. And this allows the business to take true ownership of their processes and allows partners and centralized IT teams to be responsible for the development and the automation, not the documentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop another activity here after activity 3 and get the CEO to approve my letter, assign my letter. So what I'll do is I'll go to edit. I'll jump down in my procedure here, all the way to activity 3. I'll select that quickly. I'll add an activity. My mouse would work. And I'll say, for example, sign all letters of notice. And I'll get rid of my accounts payable role here, and I'll search for my people picker to find my CEO in this case. And then we'll say, append signature to the letter before sending. And then, what we can do is we've got a comma there, use the following guide to help. And then we can go here and we can attach a guide. And we can upload one from our desktop or link one from a SharePoint or any other DMS, but we'll use our internal library here and we'll put together, for example, put together a document collation guide there. We'll attach that. So we've added an activity, we've added a task, we've added some supporting information. So I'll just quickly save that. And that's going to go over to our map. And we'll see ProMap has redrawn our process for us. So it's interpret our procedure, pick the order and the way in which things happen, and it's given us the ability to add a step there where we've got an activity, we've got a task, we've got a guide. This allows people to own their own processes, continue the improvement and the maintenance of their process as well. But what it also really allows is that all of our processes in the business look the same as well. So if you imagine what Nick and Alex showed you earlier, this incredibly well structured and simple design of what a process architecture for a business can look like, that's because they did it themselves. But if you pass off or hand off the design and the creation of processes and structures and documentation all the way from level 1 to level 5 to multiple stakeholders in the business and just say, have at it, you're going to have a varying degree of what that process information looks like. And you're going to find it very, very difficult to start building consistency in the organization when process isn't one language, it's an amalgamation of several different languages. ProMap builds a unified language of process in your organization as well. So I'm just going to use the last 4 minutes here to show you some of the additional features and functions that are relevant and helpful to those looking to use process maps like this to build systems and integrate systems as well. One thing you may have seen is that we've got linked processes sitting here either side. If I want to have a quick look at what's happening in that previous section, I can just expand my process here, and it's going to give me my access to all of the activities and all of the tasks and all of the information there. And I can zoom out and see what that looks like related to my particular process also. I'm going to drop that back in. With the actual map itself, we have the ability to document wait time, active time. We can use this information to determine cost. We can compare future state versus present state. We can also then tag improvement opportunities. So right here, I've got an improvement, an opportunity for improvement, an opportunity for improvement. And we've actually tagged in this one, the over processing tag as well. So there's a waste happening in this section. We're actually doing more than we need to do than the customer requires at this stage. So we use this to track potential ways that we can, collaborate and organize and improve our business. And on top of that as well, we look at different systems in the organization. So where are we interacting with, in this example, SAP? We could put in specific SAP modules. We could look at HR systems, other finance systems, marketing systems, as tagging where are the system structures in the organization as well. There's a wealth of features and functions available to people looking to improve their processes in ProMap. Don't have time to go through all of them today, unfortunately, but the last thing I would like to show you is making this process, since we've made the change, our new best practice operational process. So we've added the change here. This is sitting in secret away from the business. The business still sees this version here without the CEO's change, but it's about time we got the CEO involved and we published this and make it an operationally ready process. So to do that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to check my procedure first to understand the impact of my change. So I'll go to procedure and I'll highlight my changes. And I'll scroll down and I'll see that anything that's changed from the previous version will show up in green if it's added or red if it's been taken away. And I'll go and I'll get this process approved. So I'm going to submit it for approval because we've made our change. Please approve. And now we're kicking off our process approval workflow as well. So, as you go and start automating elements of the organization, building out workflows within SAP as well, and it's time to then go publish these changes and provide the organization with their new manual, their new guide to interact with these process, we'll hit that publish button. We'll go up to our dashboard here, which is the engine we talked about earlier. I'll just open up my changes in a separate tab. And it's going to take me to any change that's just happened relevant to me. So the latest and greatest change is that this process here is awaiting approval. Kieran made that description and he said, please approve. Kieran's the process expert, but who else is involved in this? Well, we've only got one other stakeholder, that's Mercedes O'Connor. But Mercedes O'Connor is currently on parental leave, so we're just going to publish that instead and push that through. So now everyone in the organization who's involved in that process, the owners, the experts, the roles, responsibilities, system owners, improvement owners, have all just received notification to say this process has changed. We have new steps, we've taken away steps. Please go and acknowledge that you understand the change to those processes as well. Okay, so that just about brings us up to 25 past. I'm going to leave my screen open on this page here because I always find it quite a nice eye-catching element of ProMap, is that this is where we will start building out reports and dashboards to help you track numbers of documented processes, what's up to date, what's out of date, how are we tracking against our improvement initiatives as well. So with that, Nick and co, that's all from me. Have we had any questions come in at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Really appreciate that. That was great. Ross, I'll hand over to you just in terms of any questions that have come through, and we've got a few minutes left before we close.
Yes, so as Nick says, we've got a few minutes, so if anyone else has questions, feel free to add them using the chat or the Q&A. But the first question we've got, and this is pertaining to ProMap, Is there a license cost for business users participating in access or review of the business processes?
That's a good question. It depends how you give people access to your processes. So we do recommend that, as you would imagine, everybody in the organization would have access to ProMap to utilize the processes I'm in, the dashboard, all of that good stuff as well. They do require licenses. But if you just want to share process information, like we did earlier with this mini mode link, as we call it, you don't need licenses to share these around and have people view them and give feedback as well. But bear in mind, these will sit externally from the system in some ways, so you won't have access to the governance stuff. You won't be tracking process acknowledgements and things like that as well. So often a combination of using both methods fits a business best.
Very good. So the next question we've got is, how would you manage documenting and capturing variant or unhappy path processes in ProMap?
That is a very good question. So you can use tags to identify unhappy areas, but we also have this brilliant piece of functionality that I was going to consider a little bit too much for today. But since you asked, we'll jump into what's called the process variation management piece. So you can select a variation, happy, unhappy, regional differences as well, customer type, product type, service type, and you can split your process by that variation. So in this case, I'll pick geography. So if I look at advertised position here, what I can do is actually, no, I'll use the example I did earlier. So if I go back to resolve payment exceptions, we'll go to the one we did earlier, may as well stay consistent. So if I've got this process here, we've just added the new step for the CEO, and I've decided, well, actually, we need to figure out how we perform this process differently across the world. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go create global variations. And from this, I'm going to select one of my variation groups. And in this case, we are going to select country. And once I do this, ProMap is actually going to split my process up by the number of countries we occupy, number of countries we work in as well. So it's going to give me a standard process that's applicable to all versions. So let's call that the parent process. And it's going to give me a number of child processes that are related to that parent process. If I change the standard process, we can push that change to each of the child process. But if I change the child process, that's going to stay localized. So right now you can see I have my standard, and then I've got all of these different country variations from Australia, China, Europe, New Zealand, Thailand, the US. Right now, they're all the same, but I have the ability to go into the Australian version, for example, and just hack away at it, start making changes, start moving things around. So we'll get rid of this, we'll get rid of this, and then we'll save it. And now people in Australia, the Australian members of our team, have a different process than the rest of the organization as well. So in this case, I've only done it for country, but you could then use the same functionality to map happy and unhappy paths also as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Very good. I'm sure it does. It was a very thorough explanation. So we've got no more questions in. So I'll just add that tomorrow I'll share a recording of the webinar with everyone who's attended, as well as links to the research Nick referenced at the start of his slides. And if Nick, you'd like to wrap up.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for joining. And thanks Kieran and Alex as well. And Kieran, that was a great demo. It's great to have an introduction to ProMap. If anybody has any further questions, then please feel free to contact Ross. He's the primary contact from the webinar, and then he can pass those questions on to me or Kieran. And with that, thanks very much, and we'll speak to you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.